the gateway to the West, Cardinal Nation. St. Louis, Missouri is home to some of the most brilliant doctors in the world. These doctors are pushing science to its limits, healing patients in new, innovative ways, and doing it at the same time they're teaching the next generation of doctors how to save lives.
Meet Dr. Bruce Kramer, a SLUCare plastics and reconstructive surgeon who has introduced a whole new level of healing. You're about to meet 4 of Dr. Kramer's patients and learn their amazing stories.
Those exercises at home are making this harder.
This is the science of healing. All 4 of these patients met Dr. Kramer and were amazed with the treatment he offered them. A powdered substance made from a pig's bladder that could heal their wound in a whole new way. This was definitely something that pushed the limits of science and was hard to believe.
Reconstructive surgery takes something that's injured or not normal and trying to restore it to normal. And so for me, that's the joy of the matrix stem. It takes things from injured and makes it as normal as you can make it.
Give it another 20 seconds, how's that? I basically was trapped under a truck for about 45 minutes, and it pretty much, well, my ankle was dislocated and partially severed, and it was in pretty bad shape.
Mr. Smith came in as a trauma, so when I first saw him, he was an inpatient already, and his wound was it was a massive wound over his ankle. He had tendons, which are what connects the muscle to the bone so that you're able to move your ankle. The tendons were all exposed, those and necrotic and dead. He had bone that was also dead and the joint was exposed.
All right, I'll give you one extra.
I met Mark in the hospital after he'd been in the hospital for about 2 weeks. He had a horrible foot injury with his bone, the talus, the bone that's really in the middle of the ankle, that had come out of his ankle. So it was put back in, but he had several bad bacteria infections in the wounds, and the tissues weren't very good. He had had division of one of the major arteries to his foot. He had fractured his other hip, and he's a diabetic. So the thought was, well, what can we do to try to save it?
Dr. Kramer, he was one of basically 3 surgeons that came in one day, and they kind of stated my situation, and 2 doctors said that they didn't think that they could save my foot, that they probably should amputate it. And Dr. Kramer said, well, I think I've got a new procedure, some new technology, new medicine. Well, I really don't remember how he stated it, but he said I might be able to save your foot. Dr. Boudreau and Dr. Putty. Dr. Putty happened to say, well, you know, we can take this foot off 15 days from now, but we can't put it back on. And my wife and I, we talked about it, and Dr. Kramer said that he could probably between 17 and 35% chance he could save my foot. So we thought, well, you know, give him a chance.
Him having all these other injuries and lung and chest injuries too, in addition to fractures of his face, I was somewhat a little reluctant to try to take one of the big muscles off of his back and put it down there on his foot, realizing it still may not make it, as much from the infection as anything. Because when wounds have that much infection in them, they often do poorly regardless of what you do. So we trialed using this on such an open wound into a joint, which hadn't really been done before.
They're doing things with this product that they didn't know they could do until they did it with me. I'm not special, I just happen to be fortunate and be in the right place with the right time.
We talked about 3 years ago. I was excited that we were getting healing to occur in situations I wasn't expecting it. But now I have the chance to follow the patients. The healing we get gets better with time, and that is very exciting to see.
Now, if I didn't have a limp and a scar and didn't get tired, I mean, nobody else could, I can tell, but nobody else could tell that I ever had an episode in my life like that. So
instead of doing standard big flap operations, we're actually able to use this now in lieu of much more complex operations. So we're using it now instead of just as a helper but as the primary means of which we then achieve the healing we were wanting to get.
My foot really has done well. I'm doing a lot of things that I never thought, and other people didn't ever think I'd be able to do.
His video, when I show him 3 years ago and then show him now, and you can see the improvements in the skin texture and the quality of the healing.
I can go to the beach or to a swimming pool, and I might get a few strange looks, but it works. I can walk on my feet, you know, so.
They're starting to understand more how the device works because of its component parts. And it has to do with how cells signal and talk to each other. But there's components of the device which potentially could be clarified or purified and have an even more potent activity. So it's a very exciting time for the science.
So many different things have come out of it. Number one, I've learned a lot. Number two, medicine's learned a lot, and probably the greatest is that people are benefiting from that medicine. So much to be thankful for.
I was able to really recognize very early on that this is a game-changing device. We have some of the best results of its clinical application that's out there.
I ended up where I was supposed to be, and then there was a medicine, a new technique that might save a foot that could never have been saved maybe even a week earlier. I don't know that there was another doctor that could do it other than Dr. Kramer.
But you can carry that.
Madison is the youngest patient I've ever treated, and she came in to the Cardinal Glennon emergency room with a very bad injury to her fingertips.
She was at home. We're just hanging out, getting ready to go to bed, and we hear screaming. So we go into the other room, and she's just bawling, obviously blood everywhere. First thing we do is, oh my God, we have to get this blood off of her and see where it's coming from. The dog was involved. Because the blood was by his cage, that she was actually bitten by a dog. By our dog, she stuck a cookie through the cage. The cookie missed, her fingers went in, so dog took her fingers, thinking it was food. Her bone was sticking out.
Wow. One more time? Uh-huh.
The first thing that was introduced to us was surgery. And then they said, hold on, let's look for some other options. We want to send you to Dr. Kramer, and he has some things he wants to talk to you about. They said, we're not really going to get into it. We're just going to send you over there and let him explain everything to you.
It's a very common injury, be it in a car door with a dog bite or catching it in an exercise bike. There's a variety of things we see with patients.
And then he showed us the powder substance, and we're like, that is pig bladder? It was amazing just to see pig bladder in a powder substance. Something that can work. Digits regrowing is a miracle.
It is made from a layer of the pig bladder which has some of the proteins in it as well as something called the basement membrane. And that's really the crux of the product. The basement membrane is the layer that supports skin. So in that layer we have growth factors and a lot of things that really promote robust healing, along with collagens and other molecules which the body breaks down. As the body breaks that down, it then encourages healing in a totally new fashion.
We had no idea what to expect. I mean, he told us that it would crystallize and it would look kind of crusty, but eventually the skin would start to grow back and the fingernails would start to grow back because she had no fingernails at all. So we're just praying that this little girl was going to have her fingertips. Just to see the results and her fingers look almost perfectly normal. He's an amazing doctor.
What are you doing?
Good.
Let's see the special hand.
Special.
Oh, you didn't even remember which one it was, did you? Oh, wow. That looks pretty good. Was this the one you heard?
No.
Was this the one you heard?
No.
No. How about this one?
Yeah.
And how about this one?
Yeah.
Okay. How do they work?
Nice.
They work good?
I like how the nails don't have the scarring and how the tips of the fingers have more thickened pulp on the end of it so that there's more padding so they can really do most everything else they would want to do.
It's kind of a miracle, like something you could never think would happen, just magically happened.
Ah!
There's not a lot of things in medicine we can restore normal, and with this we can pretty much get back to normal.
I am surrounded! Dogs want me!
to South Africa to do my master's research. And was studying the chimps, and that's when it happened. So I was attacked by chimpanzees. I mean, that's, you know, basically the bottom line of it. So
the two chimpanzees that were, they had tried to pull him into the enclosure, then they were able to sneak out, and they dragged him for quite a period of time. And so a lot of the wounds he had weren't just purely from all the bites and the attacks they did, but from him being dragged.
A lot of scarring on my head. You know, I was pretty much completely bald after all of this. Lost both of my ears, my nose. So I had a big, long, grueling process to get my nose back. You know, several scars on the face. Let's see, I had a collapsed lung, and then, you know, you can see my hands here. One thing, I lost all the flesh on the top here as well as some of the tendons. So my wrist was down like that. I had another operation that Dr. Kramer actually reconnected the tendons so I could actually move my wrist again, which has really helped tremendously. I can do almost anything now that I was able to do with my hands before. At least bigger things, not so much the finer. You know, I'm not a concert pianist, but lost half of my foot and several of the tendons in my calf, which keep your foot stabilized. So the doc they went and set my foot in place, fused my ankle with titanium, so I have a bunch of metal in there. Can't move my ankle, which really, you know, kind of limits my mobility, but with the prosthetics I've been working with, really have made a huge difference. I can run a little bit now and, you know, jump a little and do a lot of stuff that I couldn't do before they were fixed my ankle. You know, I was in several boots that allowed me to get around, but I couldn't do any type of physical activity.
So those wounds all had different levels of contamination, and we approached a wound that's a bite different than we do from tissue loss from pressure or from something being dragged.
I started out in the hospital over in Nelspruit, South Africa. Was there for a while. I was in an induced coma during all that.
Andrew came to us with some devastating injuries and having been in a hospital in Johannesburg for nearly a month. So the timing wasn't ideal, but again, I think in credit they probably helped save his life. But he had a lot of wounds that had a lot of infection in them, and they really weren't healing well. Part of that was the infections, part of it was his nutrition, because he lost, I think, in the neighborhood of 30 pounds. So it was hard for him to battle through that. The company was gracious enough to have us use the product in many different areas, and so I got a lot of experience with Andrew trying it on the many wounds he had over every part of his body.
Had a few days that were pretty rough, and then we started talking to, he was kind of a chaplain there at the hospital, and he started really helping me, I guess, get back into my my normal mindset, which is, you know, forward-looking and rational thinking and trying to be practical.
On the way back, try not to put the foot down in between.
Okay.
That's the really hard one.
You know, it happened, so there's nothing I can do about that, so I can kind of move forward. And, you know, while I was in the hospital, the Olympics were going on. I saw a pretty phenomenal runner who, you know, was missing his legs. And so that really kind of inspired me, you know, hey, this isn't the end for me.
You do some triceps.
Andrews has an amazing spirit, and he could take things. So I would have talks with him about what we were going to do, and he was still very heavily drugged from all the wounds. There was not a way he could lay that he wasn't laying on multiple wounds, and every time everything we did to him caused him some pain. So the first several days we took him to the operating room every several days just to do his dressing changes. They were so painful, but gradually we progressed out of that. But Andrew was a lesson in strength and courage.
Once you get the rope going, keep your feet a little closer together.
From what I understand from Dr. Kramer is telling me, the pig's bladder, it speeds the healing process, and it even skips several steps of the healing process to get to the real good healing. So things, you know, you don't have as much of the scarring, and I mean, he could explain it way better than me. I just know that it's, from what I've been told, it's made everything so much better for me. So
It's been useful for someone like myself in plastic surgery because we get very many challenging wounds that we don't have the best answers for. And many of the operations we might envision are very huge and complex. But on somebody who's very ill, who maybe has had radiation, who has a lot of other problems, and maybe they just won't give up cigarettes and we know they won't heal well, we now have other options for them. So it's not as quick as a flap operation or where we move something from one part of the body to another, but again, we don't have the body to sacrifice that. So if I told you you had to take a muscle off of your back to save your foot, you might let me do it. But what if I told you maybe you don't have to? The game gets much more interesting then.
Awesome. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Uh-huh. Awesome.
Well, a lot's happened in the last 3 years. Right after our interview back then, I started working at SLU.
Andrew has been a remarkable person because he has got energy and a drive for living and a love of life, which is almost unparalleled.
I was asked to use my experience as a patient to lead and develop a kind of enhanced approach to trauma care where we really take that awesome medical care that Dr. Kramer and the rest of the SLUCare physicians provide and bridge it with a holistic program where you have somebody like me, a pure patient visitor, who can sit there and be at the bedside of these new trauma patients. I spend a good amount of time over on the hospital, actually on the same floor that I was a patient for 4 weeks. I've actually been in the same room that I was in for 4 weeks with another patient.
He, through his healing, has realized that God's plan for him is to give back to others, and so he's doing that. And his ability to help other patients totally heal themselves has been great.
So I lost a lot of my scalp in the attack. A lot of it was ripped off, and normally, as the skin repairs itself, it should have left me with a lot of scarring on the top of my head, which would mean I would be bald and wouldn't have that hair, wouldn't have those sweat glands. But with Dr. Kramer and the Matrastem that he uses, it actually allowed normal hair tissue to grow on my head. So instead of having a nice scarred scalp, I have these beautiful, well, used to be beautiful long locks, but I decided, because I was able to actually have hair again and grow it out, wanting to donate it to Pantene Beautiful Lengths hair program, where they send hair like that to women with cancer.
The day of the accident was a normal day, very normal. I was ready to go home. I think we were running our last coil actually.
I met Ben probably over a year ago now, over in Dr. Kramer's office. We actually had very similar injuries in terms of our amputation level on our right foot.
About every 15 reps or so, I would see a dark mark on the edge. So I wanted to fix that before the whole coil ran. So that's what I was doing. I went up to the top of the machine and I was checking the knives, and when they felt good, and then I felt something that didn't feel so good, and it was my leg going into the machine.
Ben had an unfortunate injury in that the machine managed to catch his foot and then really pulled his skin off, much as a sock would be coming off of a foot. So it was a total degloving from his toes all the way up to above his ankle.
Went into the emergency room, obviously. I still hadn't looked at my foot at this point, so I didn't know if it was still there, what was up with it.
Classically, while a few patients in the world's literature have had that skin replaced, one often leads to an amputation. So we're able to use the device in the powder form along with his own skin and get that to heal back again.
I was definitely amazed by it because I had never read up on anything like it before, and to see living proof with other patients of Dr. Kramer, with the help that it's done and the things that it's done, it definitely amazed me.
It was touch and go, and then we got to a point where he kept having the wounds on the end of his foot break down. And it turns out that the bones at the joints, they're the first joints of the knuckles, if you will, of the correlate on the foot, that kept breaking down. He had chronic infections in that, and we didn't know that. So when we amputated those bone pieces off, we then didn't have all the healing we wanted. We used a lot more of the device, and he's had good solid healing now. So he's actually been released from follow-up care. So that's very exciting that we did standard operations to him with this augmentation. But the most astounding thing is that the sensation he has on the bottom of his foot is normal. So I wouldn't have expected that. And the heel pad skin, where you need thickness, is starting to thicken up just like a heel pad would. So classically the skin would have been scarred down and broken down, but he's actually having it thicken up with callus as one's heel would. So we've replaced the skin, and it's acting as it would if it hadn't been injured in the first place, which is very exciting.
Both, you know, young guys, and it was really cool to get to meet him and actually like meet somebody who's going through what I am. You know, that's kind of the whole reason behind me visiting with patients, but at the same time, it helps me.
I think having a support group is I think everybody who goes through any type of trauma needs support, and what they're doing is phenomenal. You know, people need it. I spent over a month in the hospital, and you go through all these emotions, and you know, to have somebody walk up and, you know, just introduce themselves and be like, hey, this is my story, you know, can you tell me a little bit about yours? I think that's a really good thing.
He had a great outcome, and he's just a great guy. So it's just nice to see him walking with both of his feet.
You know, he's just always forward looking, and he makes me laugh whenever we meet, and just to see that there's people out there that have that strength in them just makes me feel that I'm not alone. It makes me feel like what I'm doing is important.
I think the two of them have gotten each other emotional support, because Ben has had to deal with a whole lot himself in terms of being around his child and always being the sick one with the foot problem. But now, you know, aside from wearing shoes with an insert, he can be back to normal. Part of it's when you have an injury, you have to find forgiveness in your heart. That doesn't always come easily, but sharing and talking it through with others, somehow there's some acceptance and forgiveness that comes, and move on with the gift of life and joy of life. I always felt like there was people there that were rooting for me and wanted to see me succeed, and if they believed in me, why shouldn't I believe in myself? And that's really what we're trying to recreate here, and getting to see how well Ben has done in the last, you know, since his injuries in the last couple years it's remarkable. He's walking again, just like me. You know, the doctors said we might not walk normally again, but we are, and it's just so cool to see his growth. Oh, Dr. Kramer's the best. He's an amazing mentor, an even better friend. Have traveled together, we've given talks together, joint talks, kind of, you know, patient-provider kind of talks. We've gone to some conferences together, and went to a really cool conference in Orlando a few months ago, and actually ended up staying another day, and he and I went to Universal Studios. And you're better because you've known Andrew, and so I think he's had that effect on people even before his injury, but definitely now that it's just people affect you that way. There's a handful of people I've been grateful for, so I consider him a patient, but more importantly, I consider him a friend.
I've had a lot of blessings over the last several years. You know, surviving, first of all, getting my care here at SLU, as well as getting this opportunity to lead a new approach to trauma care. But, you know, probably the greatest gift that I have received is my little baby Lily. She's actually 10 months old today, and she's just the brightest part of my world, and nothing makes me happier than watching her grow and learn, and such a proud dad, and none of this would have happened if I didn't go through what I went through. And I can't be any more thankful for my doctors who have given me the ability to walk again and live again, because I can play with my daughter. You know, those were some of my worries when I was first in the hospital was, first of all, would anybody ever, you know, love me, you know, with all my scars and amputations. And if that happened and I had kids one day, would I even be able to play with them, or would I be confined to a bed or something like that? And with the level of healing that St. Louis University and all of its physicians have given me, I get to play with her all day long and crawl around with her, and now she's getting ready to walk, so I get to be there to walk alongside of her, and it's a dream come true.
As far as the SLUCare Physician Group, they're a network, and a network is just like a chain. You're only as strong as your weakest link. They don't have a weak link. Dr. Boudreau, Dr. Putty, Dr. Cargis, Dr. Whiting, on and on. I mean, if you count my emergency rooms, I had probably about 20 different operations or procedures. And I even got cards from the prep, where you go in, you prep for surgery. I got cards from the nurses and the caregivers that, it was good having you there, because they knew who I was, and they're there to help, and they do help.
While sometimes it's experimental, we share with the patients so they can partner with us. And again, they feel the joy and participation in their healing because they understand it. So many of the patients have become experts on layers of the pig bladder, which they never, I'm sure, dreamed they would ever do. We've been very excited about how we've been able to achieve healing with a wide variety of injuries. What's wonderful about the SLUCare family here is that we all play together well. And so I can be sure that the patients have wonderful expertise and management of all their medical problems, so I can purely focus on the wounds. And with that, we get really good outcomes here.
I like knowing the science behind it, because it gives me an understanding of why I'm healing the way I am, as opposed to why I wouldn't be if we didn't have the pig's bladder stem cell.
I'm even getting phone calls now from around the world where people want to fly in to be seen because they have now known what we can achieve with what's been out there in the media or out there in the different seminars or presentations I've given.
He's good, he knows it, but at the same time, I don't think he knows how good he is, And he's so preoccupied in trying to help people. At one point, he asked me what he's going to do with this here, and I said, "Can you make me look good?" And he said he's not a miracle worker. He's a doctor, but he's not a miracle worker. Just jokingly, he is a miracle worker though, in his own way, and I believe that.
We're very thankful. Who would think that science would come up with something like this?